Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 476, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, directed by David Fincher, 2008. Okay, this should be a film that's fairly familiar because it was a Best Picture nominee for 2008, and I know there were several viral videos that came about at this time, so very, very quick summary of the plot. This is Benjamin Button is a guy who has experiences reverse aging. The minute he's born, which is at the very end of World War I, he looks like he's about 80, and then as he actually ages, as he goes through the future, he is reverse ages. So then by the end, in the spring of 2003, he dies as an infant, even though mentally, in other respects, he's more like 80. So again, it's a parallel reverse aging, and then in the middle of that, there's a love story involving Kate Blanchett. So that's really it. So that's basically the story. It's almost 3 hours of this reverse aging thing. Now, I am somebody who has I'm one of the few, I may be one of the few people that has kind of a negative reaction to this film. But actually, it's a very similar negative reaction to others have. What I really love about this film is the technical achievements, especially the visual effects that were used to pull off a convincing reverse age process. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of work that went into it. In fact, this was the reason why I got the Criterion edition of this in the first place, because there were plenty of supplements that talk about everything involving the production of the film, and that in and of itself is really, really fascinating. And in that respect, it is worth watching well, it certainly is worth getting if you want to know what goes into, first off, what goes into a production in general, because this was a story that went through its own sort of development hell, but then came out of it. And so the production, the history of the production and what went into it was really, really fascinating. And I definitely admire that. It's a tremendous technical achievement in certain respects. But in the end, I can't really like this film. And I've tried twice. I've seen the film twice, and I just really can't get into it. And the first one is because the reason why all the viral videos were made. It's because the screenwriter of this was Eric Roth, who won his Best Adapted Screenplay Oscar for Forrest Gump. And if you've seen Forrest Gump and you see Benjamin Button and you go, oh shit, there's way too many parallels. There's way too many similarities. And it really does feel like watching Forrest Gump again in a lot of respects, except now you have a reverse aging as opposed to someone who has an IQ of 75 and can run real fast. And so, like, do I really need to go through this? And is sort of a central figure at key moments in history. And while obviously the scope is a little wider, you go from the end of World War I to 2003. In fact, the framing device happens while Hurricane Katrina approaches. So actually, it's Button dies at around 2003, but the way that the story is told is obviously late 2005. So while the scope of history is much wider than in Forrest Gump, I still can't help but feel like I'm just watching Forrest Gump again. But that to me is not the bigger issue. The bigger problem with it is that I can't really buy into it playing out in reality. It's one of those films where I think it's more fun to think about than it is to actually watch it. I mean, I love the themes behind it. The nature of living and sometimes you don't feel your age, or sometimes you can act beyond your age. I get all of that, but but I think it's just the way that it's executed. It just feels too unrealistic, and the premise itself it is very magical. While it is rooted in a history, it's ultimately it's magical realism, and it's a very hard thing to pull off, and it just I don't know, it just feels very flat. It feels very unrealistic. I felt as if the story itself didn't match the depth and the detail what went into the visuals. So it's that kind of situation where it just the two really didn't quite match up. And I feel that it really doesn't. Some films I can forget. Some other films that have this kind of mismatch, I can forgive because ultimately it does pull off. Blade Runner, I think, is a really good example of this, where everybody talks about the visual aspects of Blade Runner, but usually the criticisms that are made against that is that the visuals take over the story, or that the story feels like it's a little bit lower than the visuals. I think that it works as a whole piece, and that the story does come through in the visuals. It just has to take you a while to get into it in order to find it. And to really experience it. But here I feel that there is a gross imbalance. I feel that the story is not as sophisticated and worthwhile than the visuals, to a certain extent. And maybe also I've experienced enough films that dealt with similar themes and similar ideas that were just executed better. And I felt as though that I would, if I want to see that, there's other films that I would choose over this. But again, I admire the work that went into this, and David Fincher is not a full filmmaker. I mean, when he gets into a project, he fully commits to it, and you got to admire he would appreciate this. You got to admire the testicular fortitude he always exudes in his films, to make it the best that he possibly can, and I think that's why there is something worth seeing as far as just seeing it all play out. But the thing that keeps me at a distance, and it's not even I don't even really have ambivalence to it as much, but why I ultimately don't, I really do not like the film in the end, in spite of the strong positives on certain areas. But what holds me back is the story itself, the execution of it. I just feel that it's very flat. It's not particularly interesting, and I don't really believe the characters. It doesn't really compel me into feeling their lives. It's a film that's probably more fun to think about, the implications of reverse aging, and what that entails. I think it's more fun to think about it than it is to actually watch it. So, kudos for effort. And I feel really bad because there's plenty of David Fincher films that I do like. I really enjoyed Fight Club. More recently, I really liked both The Social Network and The Girl with Dragon Tattoo. In fact, I saw it twice in the theaters. In fact, I could say that the only complaint that I have for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is that I think that the main title should have been played at a much louder volume than it was. That's my only complaint. But everything else I really, really liked. Yeah, I like The Social Network. I even liked The Game, and that took me a while to get into. I will talk about that in the future. But yeah, I like that. And I haven't seen Panic Room. It's been a while since I've seen Seven. So he's a filmmaker to admire, and I love the total commitment he puts into his film. to his films to make everything at top form. But in spite of that, I think the ultimate weakness of the film, and this is what I think really hinders it. This is the Achilles heel of the film, is the script. Now, like I said, this was a project that went through a bit of development hell, because the basis of all of this was from the short story by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and by the way, the other difference is that there are some translations in both time and space. In the short story, it all takes place in Baltimore, and it starts at I want to make sure I get the timelines right. I think it starts a little bit before. It either starts at the Civil War or during the antebellum. But it starts around there, and then it ends more or less in either during World War I or a little bit after. I forget exactly when the short story was written. So the timeline is different, and then the location is different, since it's around Baltimore as opposed to New Orleans. In fact, the New Orleans thing came about kind of by happenstance, and it also led to some other things as well. As things were happening in New Orleans, it also helped fuel the story in some other respects as well. But during this development hell, there was somebody else who was attached with the script, and she still received story credit. Robin Swicord her script was the basis of the project for the longest time, and I still have yet to. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but I really would be interested in reading her take on it, and I'm wondering if that script was remained, it would have saved it. I think one, not criticism, but one feature about the script that didn't carry over was that because this was written during the age of jazz, and there's a lot of jazz motifs that were infused into the story, and that was something that was probably distracting. I forget exactly by who. But I don't know if it was from David Fincher or Eric Roth or Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall. In fact, during the whole development hell, that they actually managed to acquire the project. And actually for a time, Steven Spielberg was supposed to direct this, but then he ended up doing Jurassic Park and Schindler's List, and he's gone on to do other things as well. So. Actually, when I think about those details, I still feel bad for me not liking this, because I know it went through a lot of crap. And the biggest obstacle, which is why it went through development hell, which was how do you make a convincing performance out of somebody who has reverse aging? And it was one of those things where the technology had to be ready in order to pull it off really well, because do you do like 6 different actors, and how do you get that? And it was just also, but then the time was right. I think it was started in 2000, like around 2005 or 2006, where you felt that that you could do this with the right technology, and the tools were there, were starting to be there, and then it got refined and developed to meet the demands of the film. So it was a film that took advantage of the technology, but at the same time pushed it, and to now where the big thing that it hailed was face replacement, where you could. You can animate a new face, or you can replace somebody else's face, so that you can have the same actor, but you can have the actor look different. And of course, and in this case, it helps with reverse aging, because again, Brad Pitt remains pretty much throughout the entire film, but he's just modified in a lot of different ways. And that's what started it, and then it was used again with the Social Network, and I believe it was used in other. And I know it was also used in Black Swan, the face replacement. So it helped to kickstart that. So and so technically it's a great film, and it should be admired for those grounds, and it was rightfully honored in the Oscars for that. It won best art direction, best makeup, and best visual effects, and those were rightfully deserved. But it's the story that really makes me really not like this film. So it's I don't know exactly what you would call it. It's a dislike with reservations, or with good cause. Because I guess if you don't believe in the story, if you can't get into the characters, then you can't get into what the film is supposed to be about, and it doesn't become a totally satisfying viewing experience. You always have those moments where you just sort of like, it just becomes a little bit uneasy. So I guess in the end I just feel very, very conflicted. I like some parts of it, but then there's other parts of it that I don't like. And then in the end, I think it's just the parts that I don't like that just make me really not like this film. Now, on the grand scale of things, I would prefer this film over to some other stupidly made films in other areas that certainly fail in technical achievements. And even if they do succeed in some technical achievements, there's probably some other aspects of it that I don't like. But yeah, that's really what it comes down to, is that I really admire it more than I love it. So it's that kind of negative response. But at the same time, but I don't regret doing this, because again, the supplements is what makes it really worthwhile. To know what went into making the film, and that in and of itself is really fascinating. So again, I think I'm glad that it was made, but I don't like the end result. And in the end, I think it's just more fun to think about it than it is to actually watch it. So, but if that's the worst, if this in the end is the worst film that David Fincher has ever made, then I would say he's had a stellar career. So yeah, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And until next time, take care.